I mean, as you can see, I'm just hiding out in this log cabin to escape the terrible blizzard rampaging outside. You know, just a humble abode, nothing too crazy. But hey, at least there's a fire going. And look, I have my Christmas tree set up and everything. Man, it's crazy to think that this year is coming to a close already, and to be honest, maybe it's for the best. I mean, sure, 2025 has had its good moments, we've all had our fun, but, well, let's not mince our words here. We're living in scary times, and that's putting things lightly.
I'm dying right now!
But hey, it's Christmas time. 'Tis the season of giving and showing kindness to one another. And around this time, I usually like to cozy up in front of the TV with some hot cocoa and binge a bunch of Christmas films. Sometimes it's the little things like this that make you feel all warm and cozy and even think that things are going to be fine. Fuck it, let's bring that doom and gloom to Christmas movies as well. We have a bunch of retail workers who have to suffer through listening to crappy Christmas covers all day, so we should suffer as well, why not? And I have just the thing for this video, because did you know that there are some disturbing Christmas movies out there? Now, I could go the obvious route and cover your typical horror flicks that feature tons of gore and a stupid title, but what fun would that be? Now, don't get me wrong, I could have a field day talking about something like Terrifier 3, which features moments that made me feel genuinely queasy, but in all honesty, it doesn't really do much for me. Instead, I'm going to be going over a couple of films that I think are truly amazing and something I would genuinely recommend people check out. When talking about these movies, I don't really want to give too much away because I'd hate to spoil anything to anyone, but that's still tricky because there's so much about some of these films' deeper themes that I really want to talk about. So just as a heads up, anytime I'll be going into spoiler territory, I'll activate this alert. And if you don't want any of these movies ruined, there will be a timestamp next to the alert that you can skip to. I'll also be giving links to some of these movies in the description below in case anyone is curious in checking them out. And with that out of the way, let's just get right into the dark side of Christmas movies. The first movie I want to talk about is Black Christmas, made in 1974 and directed by Bob Clark, which, just as a side note, is really funny how this director would go on to create A Christmas Story, which is a completely different experience on its own. I point this out because it's so jarring to see something like A Christmas Story, which is a movie that's so humorous and that I've seen so many times and basically know almost every line by heart, being paired with something as bleak as Black Christmas. Black Christmas follows a group of sorority sisters who receive a series of strange phone calls, which devolves into them being stalked and murdered by a deranged serial killer. Now, at first glance, it may seem like your average B-movie horror flick that uses the Christmas season as a gimmick, but it's actually much deeper than that. Because unlike your stereotypical slasher flick, there are actual stakes present in the film, and a lot of the typical cliches we come to expect from something like this are pulled off in the best way possible. It's a type of story that feels both familiar in the grander scheme of horror, but elevated to a higher standard. For example, one main issue I have with a lot of these slasher flicks is that a lot of the victims can be rather insufferable, and a lot of the time I just want the killer to murder them already. But in Black Christmas, it gets you invested with a lot of the characters, which is pulled off really well in the beginning. The first half of the film can be very comedic in nature, which can complement some of these characters' quirky personalities. As a result, rather than acting as stand-ins who only serve to be murdered, these people feel much more three-dimensional, which is something I prefer. It makes you really connect with some of these characters, and all the more tragic once they get picked off. But of course, with every great cast, there must be a great villain, and they definitely cooked with this one. Billy is probably one of the most terrifying villains in any slasher film ever, and that's crazy coming from a Christmas film that had 2 crappy remakes. Something about Billy that really sells it for me is his anonymity. He acts as some malevolent force that's always near, but can be rather unpredictable. We barely see what he looks like through the entire runtime, only getting glimpses of him, or even viewing things in his perspective. But something that's really prominent of Billy is his voice through the phone. And at first, a lot of what he says is incredibly perverse.
Pretty big cunt. Pretty big cunt. I make a pretty big clit. I'm like a tuning fork, baby. Not bad.
But as the film goes on, the calls start becoming more demented and genuinely terrifying. As a matter of fact, the whole progression of the entire film is really great, as it's more of a dark comedy near the beginning with subtle hints of mystery, but things just get more and more bleak as it goes on. This can also be seen in the actions of a lot of characters where they don't take the situation so seriously, but by the time they do, shit's gone too real. And the way the mood slowly turns sour feels so natural and only drags the viewer in with its dirty claws. And again, while this is a slasher film at the end of the day, and certainly has its pulpy moments, everyone here is just on top of their A-game. The direction, the cinematography, and the acting is all done so well. And it's these aspects that not only bring a lot of depth to the movie, but also magnify the intensity in some of the more frightening scenes. However, one aspect of the film to make note of is how it enforces feminism through its characters and the use of casual misogyny. Like I said before, these main casts of characters, specifically the women, feel much more real and fleshed out compared to what you see in your typical slasher flick. As a matter of fact, our main character, Jess, has agency and makes the choice to have an abortion despite her boyfriend being aggressive and a bit of a douche. There are also other moments that remind me of The Unruly Woman, specifically with Barb and Mrs. Mack, who completely steal the show with their demanding presence, as well as how goddamn funny they are. But it's also worth pointing out how some of the men interact with these women. Sergeant Nash is a great example of this, as this guy is basically a fuck-up at work. This is the guy who didn't take the sorority sisters seriously until a man walked in, basically stating, "Hey, cut this shit out, a woman is missing." But if we're being real, while Nash can be insufferable at some points, a lot of these other men aren't any better. You have Peter, who is basically an incel in the making, trying desperately to have the upper hand in his relationship with Jess, and when things don't go his way, he pretty much throws a tantrum. And even though someone like Lieutenant Fuller does take things seriously, at the end of the day, it was Jess who defended herself against Billy, as well as Peter soon after. And not to mention that even though they put Jess to bed to look after her, they leave her behind not long after. And then there's Billy, who, in a way, acts as a personification of the dark side of men. Someone who is emotionally unstable and could lash out at any second, specifically towards innocent women. Now, at one point, it is believed that Peter could be the killer, which isn't too far off if you think about it. Whenever Billy makes a phone call, it's filled with incoherent, disturbing babbling, and at one point when Peter calls the house, the way he breaks down over the phone is somewhat similar to one of Billy's calls.
Peter, where are you?
Please, Jess. You know how I feel about the baby.
Don't do this.
Jess, don't hurt the baby. Please stop. Oh, God, please.
Not only that, but Later that night, the scream that's heard from the house when Jess has an altercation with Peter isn't too far off from her initial reaction to Billy. What I'm getting at is that even though Peter is revealed to not be the killer, there are some parts in his attitude where it's dangerously close to the killer. Now, it could be possible that I'm looking into this too much, as Bob Clark himself stated that he didn't intend the film to have political leanings, but there's still just some of these little things that I feel like couldn't have been coincidental, such as the fact that a lot of the men that are meant to protect are bad at it, or at the very least aren't taking things seriously, leaving the sorority girls to look out for one another. The fact that it's implied how it doesn't take much for men to snap and do horrible things. And the fact that even their own sorority house harbors a psychopathic man, which basically places them in a position where nowhere is safe. Now, obviously, I'm not a sorority girl myself, but the idea of having my home or safe space harboring a deranged killer that I don't even know, that would just make me feel so helpless. In the end, if you were going to watch something Christmassy that also acts as an effective horror film, but nothing too shocking to scare the normies, this is right up your alley. However, things are going to get much more challenging from here on out, so be prepared to get some emotional damage with what's to follow. Mysterious Skin is a 2004 coming-of-age drama film directed by Greg Araki, which is also an adaptation of Scott Himes' novel of the same name. Before I delve into this movie, I have to give out some trigger warnings because this one delves into some pretty dark and challenging subject matters. It is a film that heavily revolves around this. If this subject matter is something that makes you feel uncomfortable, here's a timestamp so you could skip through it. The film follows two pre-adolescent boys who both experienced SA as children, and we see how it affects these two as they grow into adulthood. They both live completely different lifestyles, with Neil being a very sexually active sex worker, and Brian being a more reserved person who obsesses over alien abductions. We both see their lives play out, going back to their childhood days where they were both part of their Little League baseball team, then living out their separate lives before crossing paths again. If I'm being honest, when I first went into this a while back, I was nervous because I know there are a lot of films that deal with topics of SA that completely fumble the bag, resulting in some of the most offensive and tone-deaf pieces of shit out there. But I don't think I've seen a film that handled things quite well as this. Greg Araki always struck me as someone who has an understanding in how carefree the minds of teens and young adults function. When you look at a lot of his films, there's a great sense of quirky energy behind the performances and dialogue that feel nonsensical but natural at the same time. It's something that gives a lot of personality to his films, and in a way, it's also pulled off here as well. Now, don't get me wrong, there are many moments where it becomes very hard to watch, but there's also a lot of more lighthearted moments, whether they be wild and all over the place or feeling more emotionally vulnerable, and dare I say, containing some surprisingly wholesome moments. And this works out very well because it allows these characters to be more fleshed out and feel more real. In terms of performances, everyone does an incredible job, especially the two leads. Joseph Gordon-Levitt gives such a powerful and complex performance as Neil, who strikes me as someone who has an almost rebel without a cause attitude, and yet beneath all that is someone who comes across as very sensitive and vulnerable. However, Brady Corbet as Brian absolutely knocks it out of the park. There's just something about his cadence as Brian that feels so relatable, mainly because of his awkward yet lovable personality. But then there are those moments where he opens up and showcases his pain that's just so gut-wrenching to witness.
What happened to me that night I woke up bleeding in the cellar? Where were you that night? God, I can tell you don't even remember.
You're drunk.
Quit avoiding the subject! I was bleeding! I kept passing out! I wet my fucking bed, and you never asked why!
I suppose what really makes Mysterious Skin stick is how confrontational it can get, but in doing so also becomes very vulnerable and open. There's a bit of a dreamlike feel to this movie, particularly with its great soundtrack consisting of shoegaze tunes. There's also a great sense of color that really brings a lot of life and style to what we see, and there are random points where the film fades to black that almost feel like the film itself is drifting in and out of consciousness. And this atmosphere it sets up makes a lot of the more confrontational scenes all the more impactful. And it's this amount of detail and complexity that really reflect the amount of care and forethought that was put into this. Even though I can't really say much about the subject matter itself, something I will say right off the bat is that even though this film can be really tough to stomach and get through, I really appreciate how much thought and care was put into the script and the well-being of the actors. When shooting the scenes with the child actors, which are really hard to watch, they filmed the scenes separately with each individual actor performing alone, and then they would edit the footage together, not to mention giving the parents the entire shooting script to review. And it's things like this that really reflect the good nature in the people who worked on this movie. It shows that you can make a movie that deals with topics such as SA against minors without endangering the child actors, just as long as you get the right people behind it and you set up the proper precautions. I also really appreciate how this film doesn't have your standard plot structure or stereotypical Hollywood ending. The way I see it, this is basically the film's way of saying that there are people like Neil and Brian who exist and need to be heard. How the main themes of the story run much deeper and affects thousands, if not millions of people in real life. This film is what you get when you have people who understand what they're working with, who want to explore these subject matters in a way that's effectively challenging, but also maintaining its dignity. Because trauma is a very real thing, and it's not something that has a grand climax or a happy Hollywood ending, but it doesn't mean that everything is always horrible. Because in the end, we're shaped into who we are as we grow, and while there isn't some divine statement into why these terrible, awful things happen all over the world, the most someone could ask for is to just be there for them and have an understanding of their pain and who they are that transcends words. Sometimes each other is all we've got, and even if it's not much, it helps.
I wanted to tell Brian it was over now and everything would be okay. But that was a lie. Plus I couldn't speak anyway. I wish there was some way for us to go back and undo the past. But there wasn't. There was nothing we could do. So I just stayed silent and trying to telepathically communicate how sorry I was about what had happened.
Like I've said before, even though this can be very emotionally damaging, it's also incredibly honest and heartfelt, and I really admire how everyone involved treated this movie with the respect it deserves. It's something that I recommend everyone check out at least once in their lifetime, whether you end up loving it, hating it, or feeling somewhere in the middle. And it's also kind of funny to think about how a lot of the people who were a part of this movie are such film geeks.
John Waters is the original godfather of everything to me. I just want to really pay tribute to him. And this movie, I remember just being blown away by how intensely punk it was.
Oh, The Mother and the Whore. Oh, the absolute best. Just one of these films that, you know, it's so hypnotic, and for some reason it's at 4 hours long or whatever. You can rewatch it again and again and discover something new. It's really just one of the greatest.
The Hunt is a 2012 Danish drama film directed by Thomas Vinterberg, who is also known for directing other acclaimed films such as Another Round and The Celebration. It stars Mads Mikkelsen as a teacher who becomes the target of mass hysteria after being falsely accused of... yeah. And just from that short description alone, you can already tell that this is going to be tough to get through. If I were to be blunt, out of everything we've covered thus far, this one is probably the most feel-bad of the bunch. Something I've noticed about a lot of the works made by Vinterberg, or based on what I've seen, is that while there's a lot of personality and charm behind them, he does not hold back when showcasing some of the ugly sides of humanity. But what sets him apart from others is how he's able to get a sense of what I can only describe as realness that connects with the viewer unlike any of his contemporaries. At their best, a lot of his films really put you inside the head of the main character and you feel all the joy and pain they go through. The Hunt is easily Vinterberg's most challenging and depressing movie he's made, but instead of feeling like some trauma porn, it's very down to earth with its difficult subject matter, as well as showing the negative effects of mob mentality. But really, what makes this film so memorable and upsetting is the character of Lucas. Mads Mikkelsen gives what I can only describe as a career-best performance. What's interesting is that normally Mads is the type of guy that's typically cast as a villain, which he often pulls off really well, even if he's not trying all that hard. But then you have him in this movie where he plays a school teacher being accused of a heinous crime, and we get to see this helpless side of him that's just so devastating. There are many moments where all you need to do is look at his sad face and notice the pain in his eyes as he tries to maintain composure, and that alone is just enough to break your heart. It's also a good time to mention that you should not expect this to have any semblance of happiness, because this can be such a depressing watch. The way we see everyone turn against Lucas, as well the extent it goes to, can be very difficult to stomach, but still pulled off so effectively. The harshness with some of these scenes almost makes the film seem more like an endurance test to see how much the audience could handle before breaking down. And the fact that everything is incredibly grounded in reality only makes this film cut deeper. However, I don't want this to scare anyone away. I appreciate it when a film becomes really challenging and gets people to confront some of these darker sides of humanity, even if it is consistently bleak and for most of the runtime doesn't show any light at the end of the tunnel. In fact, I would go as far as to say that there should be more dramas like this that are emotionally exhausting to get through. To further expand on the down-to-earthness of The Hunt, even though what Clara said is a lie, I still wouldn't really blame how a lot of the townsfolk reacted to these allegations. I mean, Lord knows that I would freak out and you would freak out if you ever heard that your local teacher did the worst crime known to man towards one of their students. The way I see it, there really isn't anyone that you would classify as a villain, but it's more like the whole situation itself is just really terrible to witness. It's horrible that Lucas had this accusation leveled against him that nearly ruined his life, not to mention something that he could never truly escape now. It's horrible that Theo was tormented with the thought that his daughter suffered in the hands of someone who he thought as his friend, and in such a terrible way, according to the rumors. It's horrible how Marcus was also roped into all this and was on the receiving end of the townsfolk, all because he was Lucas's son. It's horrible how Clara laid witness to all the drama and chaos that stemmed from a little lie she came up with. What I'm getting at is that I could go on and on with all these different characters and how depressing this situation is. Now, I'd like to hope that most of the characters had some goodness in their hearts and were hoping to do the right thing, be it bringing justice against evil. But it's still scary to think about how all it takes is just one simple push to ruffle the feathers of a community and have people turn against each other. So I'd recommend this to people who are really into dramas, particularly the more intense psychological ones. But like I said before, don't expect to leave this without at least feeling somewhat empty inside. And if this does end up putting you in a really sad mood as the credits roll, my suggestion is to take a breather and go watch something wholesome like Nightmare Before Christmas or Muppets Christmas Carol, and you'll be alright. And also I gotta give a shout out to Another Round, which is another Vinterberg film that is probably his most humorous film to date. Now, there's one more film that I have to briefly mention. It's something that may seem rather unassuming at first, and to some maybe even mid. Although if you pay attention to a lot of the subtext, there's something quite shocking that remains. It's a film that weaves a web of deceit in order to fuel its evil, Christmassy propaganda. But I can't talk about it for too long. I feel like I'm being watched by a certain cold fellow. All I can say is the name of this film is Christmas with a Crank. I think that's a good place to wrap things up. I hope that I've at least piqued people's interest in these movies, even though this has been much more brief compared to some of my other videos. I figure that it would be better to keep things more simple this time around, especially with 2024 wrapping up and all. If there are any particularly disturbing Christmas movies that you enjoy that wasn't mentioned, or if you have thoughts about the movies that were mentioned in this video, make sure to leave a comment down below. And if you've made it this far, thanks for sticking around. If you've enjoyed this, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell as well to be notified for new videos. Also, be sure to join the They Took Our Eyes Discord as well, where I'll be posting some behind the scenes work, start chatting about different things, as well as hosting some events such as watch-alongs. I also make drawings for any new members that join, so check it out. And of course, I'd also like to wish people a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and to stay safe out there. Thanks again for watching. My name is Valentino, and I'll see y'all in the next year. Bye!